Democrats HQ. And you are our heart and soul of the HQ. And we want to tell you exactly what work that we did. And guess what? It all worked. It worked. We're going to tell you more about that in a minute. But let me introduce to you Brian Coker, who is our CFO. Wave to everybody, Brian.
Hello.
And then we have Tamra Melzer Levinson, our Executive Director Supreme. Yay, Tamra. And we have Mana Shushtari, our Field and Communications Coordinator, and Davis Hahn, our Political Consultant, Barry Rosenbaum, our Senior Staff, Andy Linden, our phenomenal Recruitment Coordinator, Eve Levinson, our National Youth Advisor, and then we've got tech support and our fellows, and we have all our fellows here, and we couldn't do it without them. So I can't introduce all of them, but as we go along, we'll ask them to say hello to you. Okay, let's get going here. Davis, would you begin the program and start us off?
Thank you for that great introduction, Melissa. And I want to thank all of you for being here. It's incredible that even after all of these months of Zoom events, there's still 200 plus of you willing to come spend an evening with us. So thank you so much. As you know, today we're going to be mostly focusing on what methods of voter engagement worked best in 2020. But I thought a helpful way to start this discussion would be to take a look at what some of our prior assumptions were on contacting voters going into 2020. Obviously, this was an election like no other before, and will probably have been an election unlike no other in the future in terms of trying to reach as many voters as possible in the middle of a pandemic. But there is a ton of existing research that has been conducted over the course of decades determining what is the most effective way to contact voters. I'm giving you here just a quick summary of what that research says, but if you want to look in more detail and take a look at those individual studies and what their findings were, you can find the detailed version of what I'm about to present on by going to our website, grassrootsdems.org. If you click on the resources tab on the top of your page, you'll see a link that says, does contacting voters really work? And it'll take you to about an 8-page summary document that breaks down a bunch of existing research that had been done in the past over the different ways of contacting voters. So we knew going into 2020, decades of research has shown this, that canvassing, knocking on doors, talking to voters face to face has been by far the most effective way to persuade voters, to then mobilize voters and get them to go to the polls. On average, research has shown that canvassing increases turnout from anywhere from 5% to 10%. And that's a really big deal. I mean, we're talking about a 5 to 10% jump. That's that's larger than the jump in turnout that we saw in a lot of states on the Democratic side from 2016 to 2020. And we, of course, know that increase in turnout is what won us this election. Canvassing has always been a very powerful tool. When you're able to have a face-to-face conversation with voters, build a personal connection with them, you're much more likely to be able to convince them to vote for your candidate or even to go vote at all. But of course, we knew canvassing was extremely limited in 2020. It was not safe for most of the election season for us to go knock on doors and talk to voters face to face. So what we did instead is we focused on what our prior assumptions told us were the two next best things. And that was phone banking and texting, or as you often heard us describe it in 2020, quote unquote, virtual canvassing, where we still were able to have those back and forth conversations that you want to have with voters. Not as effective as doing it face to face, but again, in the midst of a global pandemic, really the next best thing we could have been doing. Phone banking in past studies has been shown to increase turnout from anywhere from 3 to 5%. Texting, because it's such a new form of voter outreach, there's not as much data, not as much research behind the efficacy of texting programs, but on average, it shows an increase of 2 to 3% in turnout. We worked a lot with Environmental Voter Project in this last cycle, and they recently, which you can find on our website as well, published the results of studies that they did about their texting efforts, and they found that they were able to mobilize and register new voters in the thousands, even hundreds of thousands. So there's a lot of evidence that texting can be effective, especially when you're targeting it to certain groups of people, particularly younger voters who aren't as likely to answer their phones. Relational organizing is also a very important tool and very effective tool when it comes to mobilizing voters. If you're not familiar with relational organizing, that's simply asking people to talk to their friends and family, people in their immediate circles, about a candidate, about the election, and trying to convince them to go to vote. That can be a very effective tool for persuasion more than anything else, particularly when it's a more uncomfortable conversation that a voter wouldn't necessarily want to have with a stranger. And then finally, handwritten postcards, similar to texting, has been something that's been a newer trend in terms of voter outreach. Typically, campaigns have only invested in paid mailers that are printed out by a political consultant, and then they blast those out to everyone in the district. But we've seen the last couple cycles, Democrats at first, and now Republicans have caught on and started doing it more too, are having their volunteers write handwritten postcards. And the limited studies that we had going into 2020 suggested that those postcards would increase turnout from anywhere from 1% to 2%, and that those postcards maybe were not very great at persuading voters, but they were great in terms of giving important information to voters, like where to find your polling place, or maybe if it's someone living in a state with someone like Ron Johnson as your senator, being able to say something like, did you know your senator voted to overturn the election? So postcards can be a really effective voter information tool, and our prior assumptions told us that they would increase turnout anywhere from 1% to 2%. So that is what we knew going into 2020. Now I'm going to kick it over to the Grassroots Democrats HQ's CFO, Brian Coker, who is going to break down for you the results of the private poll we conducted, analyzing what worked in 2020 and comparing that kind of to what we did in 2018. So take it away, Brian.
Thanks so much, Davis. So we, when we thought about 2020, we really thought about it from our point of view. All of us, I'm sure, who are on this Zoom call have spent time asking ourselves the question, did all this work I do actually do anything? Did it actually matter? And so the key research questions we asked ourselves were, which voter engagement techniques worked the best in 2020? We knew that canvassing was going to be terribly impacted by COVID, but did that matter? All the postcarding work, is it worth the effort? Is phone banking, even though it's been around for a couple decades, is it still effective? And then all of us, I'm sure, got thousands of texts, it feels like, hundreds of texts, dozens of texts. We got a lot of texts during the election. Are they actually effective? So in order to answer this question, next slide, please. What we did was we went to Change Research, which is a progressive internet-based polling organization, and we had them do a study. And so what they did was they talked to over 1,000 voters across 5 districts. And you can see the districts in the slide. 2 of them were in California. So we had CA10, which is Josh Harder's district in Modesto, and then CA48, which was Harley Ruta's district and will be again in 2022. Then we went to Virginia 7, which is Abigail Spanberg, South Carolina 1, which was Joe Cunningham, a Democrat, and then Florida 15, which is a Republican district as sort of our control. And when we looked at these 5 different House districts, we noted that in terms of the media, which is sort of the traditional way that people campaign, was pretty much the same. And we based this on an identical study that was done in 2018. And what we did in this study is we asked the question, we went to the voters and essentially asked, what do you remember in terms of being contacted? And what was your opinion of how you were contacted? Whether someone came to your door, someone called your phone, someone texted you, you got a handwritten postcard. How did you feel about that? Did it make you more interested or less interested? So we got the sense of to what extent these voter engagement techniques actually got to the voters, and then how effective they were. Next slide, please. So as I said, so we're comparing this between 2020 and then the 2018 midterms. And what we found, as you probably won't be surprised, is what you see in red as the canvassing went down significantly, right? So between 2018 and 2020, we had a pandemic. So we know that canvassing went down about 11%, and possibly if you add the candidate coming to the door, maybe a total of about 15%. The other modes of communication or engaging with voters went significantly higher, which you would expect between a midterm election and a presidential election. And note that texting really blew up, right? So texting increased by 30% between the midterms and the general election in 2020. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's look at canvassing in particular. So not surprising, but our research found that canvassing pretty much collapsed for Democrats. So we had a major advantage in canvassing in 2018. By 2020, the advantage was gone. In fact, we were running basically even with Republicans. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we're going to talk about here is I'm going to go through each mode of engagement, canvassing, text banking, phone banking, postcarding, by these 5 districts and show you how they changed between 2018 and 2020. So Virginia 7 is the only district that had a huge drop in canvassing that Democrats still won. CA 48 in Harley Ruta's district, in South Carolina 1, and in Virginia, the Republicans significantly increased their canvassing, while Democrats, because of COVID, reduced theirs, right? And not surprisingly, we won in CA 10, where the canvassing edge was maintained. But in CA 48, Florida 15, and South Carolina 1, we lost all 3. So next slide, please. In terms of postcarding, CA 10, Josh Harder's district, was the only district that Democrats increased their postcarding significantly. In South Carolina 1, again, a district that we lost, postcarding significantly increased for Republicans. In Virginia 7, we maintained our edge, but it was still closer. Next slide. So in texting, again, California 10, only district that showed a texting increase for the Democrat alone. That advantage decreased across the board everywhere except for California 48. And in Virginia 7, Democrats maintained their edge. Interestingly enough, you'll see in Virginia 7, even though our canvassing went way down, in texting and in phone banking, Democrats maintained their lead and we won the district. Okay, next slide. So in terms of calling, again, California 10 and Virginia 7, we maintained our decisive advantage on phone banking. In the 3 districts we did not, California 48, Florida 15, South Carolina 1, we lost all 3. So what do we conclude from all this? Well, number one, Democrats, our limited ability to canvass, we feel like is a major reason that we underperformed in swing districts in 2018. And by the way, I would say it's also a major reason that we are fairly optimistic that we're going to take back some of those districts in 2022. So in 2018, we held a massive canvassing advantage. From 2018, 70% of Democratic voters that we polled said that someone had come to their door for a Democrat. And that went down to around 30% in 2020. And Republicans essentially maintained their percentage across both elections. So in other words, we had no canvassing advantage in 2020. The other thing we noted, Democrats performed significantly better in districts where we out phone banked our opponents. So despite what I would say some prejudices some people might have against phone banking, our study shows that it works, and that confirms other studies as well. So again, a majority of voters, we asked voters, well, how did you feel about the phone call? Did you find it informative? A majority of voters who took the phone calls said that they appreciated the call, and they actually talked to family and friends about it, which is sort of a force multiplier for the call. So you call one person in a house, and if they talk to multiple people, that's almost like you've talked to multiple people. So that has a multiplicative effect. Really same as texting, right? If we out texted our opponents, we found we won in these districts. And again, despite what you personally might have been annoyed by the text, majority of voters, when you ask them, they said they found the text messages actually to be informative. Postcarding remained very, very popular. More than a third of the voters who received a postcard wanted to learn more about the Democratic candidate. So even though postcards are fairly laborious and they're expensive, our study proved once again that they are effective. People like them. They spur secondary conversations, and they can contain information that voters really like. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Melissa Grant, our president, and she's going to talk about how the results of this study correlate with the Analysts Institute, which is a major progressive research institute that have done their own research in this area. So I'll turn it over to you now, Melissa.
Okay, Melissa is having, oh, there she is.
Hi, Melissa.
Sorry about that. My computer disappeared for a moment. All right, the Analyst Institutes is a service that researches what is particularly effective techniques for progressives and Democrats. Do me a favor and don't share the information we're sharing with you with any Republicans, or the Analyst Institute won't like it. So here's the thing. One of the things they found out is relational voter contact, whether it's phone banking or canvassing, is extremely effective. It's the most effective way of contacting voters. It reaches way beyond the base and will effectively communicate with even new voters. And according to the Analyst Institute, in 2020, it increased turnout by 3.7%, which is almost a full percentage point more than our assumptions it said it would. The other thing that is particularly effective is what's called deep canvassing or deep phone banking. To do this, you really need to be trained. So when we want to train you, please let us train you. What it is, it's a way, it's as effective as it can be. It can reduce prejudice, it can increase support for progressive policies, and it will turn out the vote. And what it is engaging in a two-way conversation. You want to get into a conversation with the voter or the person you're speaking with and try to elicit their views, their values, and connect it back to what we're calling for. You have to listen actively. You have to model vulnerability. You could share that who they vote for is never revealed. That's always kept secret. But the fact that they vote is public knowledge. It's a very effective way at literally persuading voters to do as we wish. Okay, next slide, please. The other thing is, there's a lot of people who wonder if negative messages work. Well, in the ground game concept, positive messages work. Negative can almost redound against the candidate. It can have a negative effect on who you're calling on behalf of. Now, the other thing that's very effective is social pressure. And that's, for example, thanking the voter for voting in the past and hoping they'll continue to vote. telling them how many people turned out in their neighborhood, in their area, letting them know that the candidate we're calling for example, in CA 25, Christy Smith lost by 333 votes. And if just 333 more people vote, she would have won. That's what's called social pressure. And during the GOTV time, the get out the vote time, which is right before the election, you want to make sure you're passing along very practical information and encourage the voter and talk it through with them, a voting plan, and giving them the information of where they can vote, what the hours are for those voting places, deadlines if they want to request a mail-in ballot, any ID requirements if they want to request a mail-in ballot or show up at the polls and vote. As you know, many states unfortunately do require ID. But no matter how you're contacting a voter, be it by phone, text, postcard, or canvassing, there are certain principles a volunteer needs to follow. And these principles have produced the results that the Analyst Institute says literally increases turnout. So you want to be friendly, conversational, non-judgmental. You want to have a quality conversation. It's not about how many voters you contact or doors you knock on. It's the quality of the conversations you've had with those you did speak with. You want to get trained before the phone bank begins so that you can understand who is in the database. Are we calling low propensity voters? Are we calling new voters? Are we calling Democrats or Republicans? Ground game tends to work best when we're calling partisans, believe it or not. If the media is better at persuading nonpartisans, according to the Analyst Institute. You want to stick to the script that is given to you, both for canvassing and phone banking, but not at the cost of losing your authenticity or your genuineness. You want to come across as a real person who somebody would want to talk to. Always leave literature if you're canvassing. When they are first-time voters or low propensity voters, let them know about the fact that they vote is public, but not who they vote. So no one's going to know that, but we encourage them hopefully to consider voting for whoever we're calling for. And again, social pressure, and that includes in postcards. Social pressure techniques really help in mail pieces. That's the most effective. And I think that's all the recommendations of the Analyst Institute. But I'll tell you one other thing. The ground game works. As Brian said, it works, it does it. And in all the modes. So it's important to canvass, although that's the most effective. Phone banking, texting, mailing, together, they are what wins. And that's what we have to share with you from the Analyst Institute. Okay, so back to Tamara Levinson, our fantastic executive director.
Hello there. How are you doing tonight? First of all, I really want to thank Brian and Melissa and Davis for giving us this amazing presentation. I have to say that I love the team that I have an opportunity to work with at the Grassroots Democrats HQ. Between Melissa and Brian and Davis and Mana and Andy and Barry and Eve and the fellows that we work with, we have an amazing team to always be here to answer questions. I want to move us forward to talk about, now that we know what works, and what we know is we need to do the full array of activity. Davis, can you reshare the screen? And let me go ahead and tell you now. What are we doing at the Grassroots Democrats HQ? Like, if you wanted to volunteer, and there will be in the chat a link so that you can volunteer with us. These are all the things that we have happening. And we have a lot going on at the Grassroots Democrats HQ, right? And this is just happening now. You can be writing postcards with us for the American Rescue Plan. And we are writing currently into the districts where we lost them to a Republican, and we're basically letting the Democrats and the NPPs know that, which is no party preference, know about what the Democrats are actually doing out there, and letting them know that the person who they voted for is not doing what it is that they really want done.
Not necessarily the person they voted for, the person who got elected.
Sorry. Also, we are doing phone banking, going into CA 25, and we are doing voter registration phone banking. We already know from all the research that we just saw that the very best way of reaching a voter is to be doing it in person, but we have to be doing phone banking, we have to be doing texting, and we have to be doing postcarding. So what we know is we have to be reaching voters and registering them. And right now is not the time, because of the COVID situation, to be doing that. So we are partnering with Field Team 6, as well as organizations within CA 25, so that we are already doing voter registration phone banking there. What else are we doing? We are doing texting. We have an opportunity to be partnering with the Environmental Voter Project, and we will be texting into Pennsylvania and Virginia in preparation for the primary election happening. And so stay tuned. At the end of this month and the beginning of next month, we are going to have 4 different days of texting that we will be doing. Also into CA 25, we are doing literature drops. And there are 2 different activities actually that we're doing in person already in CA 25. And we are doing literature drops, which is a no contact COVID safe activity, letting people know what are the Democrats doing in a district that we lost during this last election cycle, but we know that we can gain it back. We are also partnering with Women's March Action. They've been doing an incredible activity in Los Angeles County, where they have been putting out information packets specifically targeting the Latinx community of women, letting them know, basically correcting information that is misinformation out there about the COVID vaccine, and going out and giving them the information so that there is a hotline number. I think there are 2 face masks, some hand sanitizer. And we've already seen, I believe, that they have within LA County 500 people that have gone and gotten their vaccine that would not have otherwise done it. And so again, we are targeting that up in CA 25. You actually see 3 different activities that we are doing there. It shows that we are trying to make a presence in some of these districts that we lost, so that when the time comes for people to know that it is time to vote, that they will know the Democrats were there to be helping them. If you look down, you can also see something called the AAPI Voter Task Force. What we realized during this last election cycle is that we had a large number of volunteers from a very diverse Asian Pacific Islander community that want to be lifting up the vote of the Asian Pacific Islander community voters. Here in Orange County in California, we ended up losing 2 different districts, CA 39, which was Gil Cisneros' district, and CA 48, which was Harley Ruta's district. In both of those districts, there are different segments of the Asian Pacific Islander community that we want to be reaching out to those voters, having cultural sensitivity and lifting up the vote there. We are doing the same within the CA 25 district, and we're doing that as well in CA 21. We have volunteers from the entire California community that have been coming and into this AAPI voter task force with us, so that we can identify ways that we can lift up the vote there. And something really beautiful is that one of our fellows, who lives in New York, is going to be doing, at the same time as we're doing this AAPI voter task force, she's actually starting a youth AAPI voter task force, and she will be looking at ways that she can help youth across the country to be lifting up their voices within their communities, to be looking at ways of helping to motivate the vote within the AAPI community, recognizing the fact that there's an age difference in how how voters can be reached out to. What else are we doing? We have the Vote Forward letters. In addition to writing postcards, there's this wonderful group called Vote Forward that we had paired with during the last election cycle. They have restarted letter writing campaigns. Stay tuned, because the Grassroots Democrats HQ is going to have a landing page, and we're going to be looking at helping group people who you can either learn how to create your own Vote Forward account and download the letters yourself, or we're going to be using our fellows and volunteers to help people that might not be able to access that technology and be able to help you get those letters for you to be sending out. We have 3 more things that we're doing. Flipping Texas 06 blue. There is a special election coming up on May 1st. That is the next election that we have an opportunity to be taking back, or to be winning and flipping a congressional district. We did flip the House in 2018, but what we saw happen in 2020 is that we held on to the House, but we have to be keeping our majority there. We have to be taking back House seats that we lost and bringing in new ones. Unfortunately, there was a congressperson who passed away from COVID in Texas 06. And even though that is a red district, and we did find that Trump only won by 3 points in Texas 06. So what are we doing? We are phone banking into that district right now. It is what is called a jungle primary, which means that there are Republicans and Democrats running in the district. And what it is that we want to do is we are uplifting the vote of trying to get out as many Democrats in Texas 06 as we possibly can. The hope is that on May 1st, when the primary election happens, we will end up in a runoff election. And we want to have 1 Democrat and 1 Republican running at that point. And then we want to take Texas 06 as the first congressional district that we can win in 2021. Phone banking to be ending the filibuster. The Grassroots Democrats HQ has traditionally only worked on electoral work, meaning we worked on red to blue races when we were helping a specific candidate, or we were doing voter registration. As we entered into 2021, we made the decision that we were going to work on phone banking as well for anything that actually relates to the electoral process. We know that HR 1 S1, which is the For the People's Act, is our best chance of actually fighting the voter suppression that's happening across the country. The other bill that is also something that we will be backing is the John Lewis voting rights bill. So what you have the opportunity to do is that if I call into, let's say, Arizona or West Virginia, and I call Senator Sinema or Senator Manchin, who are standing in the way of ending the filibuster and providing an opportunity for the People's Act to actually pass, it isn't going to matter. But when I call a voter within Arizona to call Senator Sinema, or I call a voter within West Virginia to be calling Senator Manchin, and they call and they say, I want to end the filibuster, I want you to be voting for the People's Act, it actually matters. So this is where we can take the volunteer power from across the country to be making a difference. What else are we doing? I want you all to know about our fellowship program. If you look around the room that we are in right now, we have a number of volunteers that are young adults. They are the backbone of what is helping to run the Zoom rooms, the phone banking, the work that we do. And they literally spend 5 hours a week during the school year, 10 hours in the summer, doing the work of the Grassroots Democrats HQ, the same work that we ask you to be doing as volunteers as well. So we are uplifting them and giving them an opportunity to be making a difference. And then I want to let you know, coming soon, we will be having phone banking into Virginia. The House of Delegates, the Senate, and the governor are all up for vote taking place in November. There are 2 states where we will have opportunities to be making a large difference in 2021, and that will be Virginia and also New Jersey. So that's all of the opportunities. If we could please put into the chat the link tree for How can I volunteer, Tamara? How can I get involved in these things? Put it there. Can you go to the next slide, Davis? Lastly, I want to let you know that on May 8th, there will be a day of action. I told you about the For the People's Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. There is a day of action nationally taking place. And on that day, you will have an opportunity to be participating within your own communities across the country in votercades, which is where people are getting their cars and they're going to be driving around. And I don't know the exact details of it at this very second because they are coming out. But there's a day of action taking place on that day. The Grassroots Democrats HQ is going to be promoting. So it doesn't matter where you are. You can do things in person. There will be a online webinar happening on that day. There will be in-person activities happening all over the country. And we are going to be promoting that along with grassroots groups across the country. And what else can you do? At 5 p.m. Pacific time and 8 p.m. Eastern time, come back here and you can be joining us for a happy hour event, just like what we're doing here. We're gonna have an amazing speaker come on that day to help us talk about the For the People's Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Please know that is a one-day activity. We have activities happening every day of the week, phone banking and supporting this as well. So please join us, come back in next month for this. So now I've told you all the ways that you can volunteer, and I wanna thank you for that. And you have to know that you are the backbone that actually makes a difference. But I'm gonna take a moment and talk about fundraising. I'm gonna let you know that if you think that what we're doing is fantastic, which can I just say, can I get everybody to maybe give a little bit of a hand clap, something for the work that you're doing and for the work that all of our volunteer leadership are doing. It's incredible. It does cost money to be keeping us going. We're going to be doing happy hours once a month, bringing incredible speakers and topics to you. We're going to keep ourselves going every day. Somebody sent me a photo of myself when we had a physical space. I used to literally get up when we had 2,000 people that were walking through a physical headquarters. I would stand on the table and I would be the person that would pass around a bucket asking people for donations. So picture me right now as though I'm standing on a table with a megaphone, and I am going to ask you today if you could please join our Defend the Blue Fund. And what I'm going to challenge you is I'm going to let you know that we have an anonymous donor tonight that let me know yesterday when they knew that we were doing this event and said, are you really not charging for this event? I'm like, no, we're not charging for it. They said, I want to match every donation that comes in at that event. So this is what I'm going to challenge you with. If we could start putting into the chat, people, the actual donation link. We need sustaining donors. I'm going to challenge you to think about how you could become a sustaining donor. You can, of course, make a $1,000 donation to us. You can make a $500 donation. You can make a $200 donation. We would love that. But if you became a sustaining donor of $25 a month between now and election day in 2022, I just want you to picture what that $25 a month will actually do. Number one, it's not going to hurt you very much for those of you who can actually afford $25 a month. What that is equivalent to is only 82 cents a day. Mana is loving the sane. I'm going to say it because it came up from her. 22 cents a day will keep the Republicans away. What I also want to point out is, what is $25 a day to you? $25 a month. $25 a month is the equivalent of, let's say, a Starbucks coffee once a week. So think about it like this. You could come once a week and have a Starbucks coffee with the Grassroots Democrats HQ by giving us $25 a day. So please, I would love it if anybody who's actually here, and maybe normally if I was in a physical room, I would say, raise your hand, call it out, say something. But if you could put that, thank you, Sarah Fields, you did it. Put it in the chat and let us know. I will donate. I'm going to become a recurring donor. Just let us know that. Let people see. Thank you, Jackie, very, very much. And let us know that you are donating to us. We really appreciate it. You see us every day, and we are not actually asking for money all the time, but we're going to start asking, and we're hoping that you're going to come through. So we're going to keep putting the chat into the chat, the donation link. And please know, each one of your donations tonight is going to be doubled. And so if you have, thank you. So keep that coming. I really appreciate you. What I'm going to do now is we're going to take down this screen so that you can see everybody. We're going to take advantage of the moment. Remember how I told you that at the Grassroots Democrats HQ, we don't actually leave because we want to pretend that we're actually here. So we're going to unmute everybody. We're going to give you a chance to say hello and talk to us. And we're going to keep putting into the chat the links for donating. We're going to keep putting into the chat the links for volunteering. And we're going to ask you to please take those links, sign up, volunteer, donate, and keep coming back. And then join us again in 1 month on May 8th as well, when we're going to keep doing these once a month happy hours, when you have an opportunity to learn from us, talk with us, and have a great time.